Look at your dog. Really look at it. It's lying on the floor doing nothing. It has never paid rent. It has never filed a report, caught a meal you couldn't buy at a store, or contributed a single thing to the household economy. You feed it, you clean up after it, you buy it a bed, then watch it sleep on the floor next to the bed. You rearrange your entire day around the biological needs of a creature that would, if left to its own devices, eat an entire birthday cake and then look at you for more. And if it died tomorrow, you would grieve. Genuinely grieve. Maybe more than you'd want to admit out loud. Now try to explain that to your ancestors, not your grandparents. Go back further. Back to the people who lived so close to the edge of starvation that a single bad winter could erase a whole community. People who could not afford to feed a human being who wasn't pulling their weight, let alone an animal that hunted nothing, guarded nothing, and produced nothing. To those people, handing your food to a creature that gave you nothing back wasn't sweet. It was insane. It was a survival error, the kind of decision that, by every cold rule of natural selection, should have gotten your bloodline politely removed from the gene pool. And yet, keeping pets is one of the oldest things we do. Older than farming, older than writing, older, in at least one case, than the end of the last ice age. Right now, more than half the households on the planet share their space with an animal they will never eat and never put to work. We have collectively decided, across nearly every culture on Earth, to spend our time, our money, and our emotional lives on creatures that offer no rational return. And we've been doing it for so long that the real question isn't why it's so common. The question is how it ever started. How did a species that survived by being ruthlessly practical about every single resource end up as the animal that cries at a dog's funeral? The answer is stranger, older, and honestly more moving than you'd expect, because the story of how we started keeping pets turns out to be the story of how we became the kind of creature capable of a love that makes no sense at all. Let's start where it actually starts, not with cats, not with hamsters, not with the goldfish you won at a fair and named something ironic. It starts with a wolf, and a problem. Somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years ago. And let's be honest right away, the exact date is one of the most argued about questions in all of archaeology. Humans and wolves entered into the single most unlikely partnership in the history of life on this planet. Unlikely, because on paper we should have been enemies. Two apex pack hunters, chasing the same prey across the same cold landscape. Competitors, rivals, the kind of relationship that usually ends with one species eating the other, or at the very least aggressively avoiding it. So how do you get from that to a chihuahua in a raincoat? The old story went like this. Some clever caveman found a wolf pup, raised it, tamed it, trained it to hunt at his side. It's a nice story. It's almost certainly wrong. Because taming a fully wild adult wolf is brutally difficult, and doing it reliably, generation after generation, with Stone Age resources, is close to impossible. The likelier version is far more interesting, and it flips the whole thing on its head. We probably didn't domesticate wolves. Wolves domesticated themselves. Here's how it most likely worked. Wherever humans camped, humans made a mess. Scraps, bones, waste, the leftovers of the hunt. To a wolf, that stinking pile of garbage was a free meal that required zero hunting. But there was a catch. To eat it, you had to get close to the terrifying, fire-controlling apes. And most wolves simply couldn't. They were too fearful, too reactive, too wired to bolt. But a few, a rare, unusual few, had a slightly shorter fuse of fear. They could tolerate being just a little bit nearer to humans than the rest. And those wolves got the free food. They ate better, they survived better, they had more pups who inherited that same slightly calmer temperament. Do that for enough generations and something remarkable happens. You're not selecting for hunting ability or size or strength. You're selecting for one single trait, the ability to be near humans without panicking. Friendliness, basically. And the friendliest wolves, the ones who could sit at the edge of the firelight without losing their minds, slowly became something that was no longer quite a wolf. They became the first dogs. It wasn't a conquest. It was an audition, and the calmest animals got the part. And if that sounds like a tidy theory that's impossible to actually prove, Here's where it gets genuinely wild, because in the 20th century, someone ran the experiment. On purpose. They took a process nature needed tens of thousands of years to finish and slammed it into fast forward, and it worked terrifyingly fast. In 1959, a Soviet scientist named Dmitry Belyaev started breeding foxes, silver foxes, the kind farmed for fur, which meant they were completely wild and wanted nothing to do with people. Belyaev's rule was simple, almost absurdly so. He selected for exactly one thing, tameness. Which fox was the least afraid of a human hand? Which one didn't snap, didn't cower, didn't flee? Those foxes and only those foxes got to breed. Every generation the same test. Nothing else counted. Not coat, not size, not looks. Only this. How calm are you around us? The foxes got tamer, which is exactly what you'd expect. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is everything else that came along for the ride, completely uninvited. Within a handful of generations, foxes bred only for friendliness started showing up with floppy ears, curly tails, patches of white fur like the blaze on a dog's chest, shorter, rounder snouts, softer, more puppy-like faces that never fully grew up. They started wagging their tails. They started whining for human attention. Belyaev had set out to breed a calmer fox, and without ever once selecting for looks, accidentally started assembling a dog out of spare parts. Nobody chose any of that. He only ever picked the friendly ones. But it turned out that friendliness and cuteness are tangled together at the genetic level, bundled so tightly that when you pull on one, the other comes along whether you asked for it or not. Sit with that for a second, because it quietly rewrites something we take for granted. We tend to assume we started keeping animals because they were cute. Belyaev's foxes suggest it may be the other way around. The cuteness might be a side effect of the tameness, a genetic accident that surfaced the moment these animals became willing to live alongside us. We didn't necessarily choose the adorable ones. We chose the friendly ones, and adorable was just the packaging it happened to arrive in. So we have a mechanism. We have a plausible account of how a wolf becomes a dog without anyone ever intending it. But a mechanism isn't a feeling. Self-domestication explains how the animals got close. It doesn't explain the part where we started to love them. For that, we need a grave. Now, brace yourself, because this is the part that changed how I think about the whole subject. In a place called Oberkassel, in what is now Western Germany, there is a grave. It is roughly 14,000 years old. Inside it, archaeologists found two human beings, a man and a younger woman, buried together with care, alongside a few carved objects. And buried with them, deliberately, was a dog. Not a wolf, a dog. One of the oldest confirmed domestic dogs ever found. And on its own, that would already be extraordinary. Direct evidence of a human-dog bond 14,000 years deep. But it isn't the presence of the dog that stops you cold. It's what its bones and teeth revealed. When researchers studied that dog's remains, they found the unmistakable marks of illness. This animal had been desperately, dangerously sick as a puppy, most likely with canine distemper, a vicious disease that kills fast and hits hardest in the very young. And the evidence suggests it didn't just fall ill once. It got sick, badly, more than once, over a stretch of weeks. A puppy that ill cannot walk properly. It cannot feed itself. It cannot regulate its own temperature. It certainly cannot hunt or guard or perform a single useful task for anyone. Left alone, in the wild, in the Ice Age, it would have been dead within days. It was not dead within days. It survived those weeks of sickness. And the only way a Stone Age puppy lives through weeks of a disease like that is if a human being kept it warm, kept it fed, kept it hydrated, and stayed with it through the very worst of it, spending scarce resources and scarcer time on an animal that in that exact moment was pure cost and zero benefit. Let that fully land. 14,000 years ago, before agriculture, before pottery, before writing, before almost everything we call civilization, somebody looked at a dying puppy that could do nothing for them and decided to save it anyway. And when it eventually died, they buried it with their own dead, as family. That is not a working animal. That is not a tool. that is a loved one. The oldest clear window we have into why humans keep pets, and what it shows us is not utility, it's devotion. The keeping, it turns out, came first. The usefulness was a story we told ourselves afterward, which brings us to the cat, who, and this will surprise absolutely no one who has ever owned one, did the entire thing completely differently. If dogs met us halfway at the edge of a hunting camp, cats waited for us to build something worth stealing from, and then they simply moved in. The cat's story doesn't begin with the hunt. It begins with grain. Around 10,000 years ago, humans in the Fertile Crescent did something brand new. They started farming, and farming meant, for the first time, storing food. Great piles of harvested grain sitting in one place. Humans had, without quite meaning to, built the world's first warehouse, and warehouses, then as now, come with a rodent problem, which was fantastic news for mice, and an explosion of mice was fantastic news for one particular small predator, the Near Eastern wildcat. These cats weren't invited, they weren't captured, or tamed, or trained, they just worked out that human settlements came bundled with an all-you-can-eat rodent buffet, and they showed up to collect. The humans, for their part, were delighted to have something eating the pests that were destroying their food. Nobody domesticated anybody. It was a business arrangement, mutually beneficial, entirely unsentimental. And if you own a cat today, you may recognize that the terms have never really changed. Your cat did not sign up to be a pet so much as review a business opportunity, find the food supply acceptable and the management broadly tolerable, and elect to stay, an arrangement it reserves the right to cancel at any time, usually at 4 in the morning, for reasons it does not intend to share. The cats bold enough to live near people thrived, and over thousands of years those bold cats drifted, slowly, into something that started to look like companionship. And here's the detail that proves it wasn't purely about pest control. On the island of Cyprus, archaeologists found a human grave around 9,500 years old, and beside it, in its own small pit, deliberately buried, a cat. This is thousands of years before Egypt and its famous worshipped cats. Someone on a Mediterranean island nearly 10,000 years ago cared enough about one specific cat to bury it beside one specific person. You do not do that for a piece of pest control equipment. You do that for something you loved. The cat, in its own aloof way, had gotten in. By now you might be thinking this is a nice story about dogs and cats specifically, two lucky species that happen to slot neatly into human life. But that's not the full picture, and this next part is the one that really seals it. Because the urge to keep animals for no practical reason at all isn't a quirk of a couple of species. It's a quirk of us, and it shows up absolutely everywhere. When anthropologists went and lived among societies that had no supermarkets, no surplus, no spare anything, hunter-gatherers and small-scale farmers across the Amazon, across New Guinea, across the world, they kept finding the same thing over and over. These communities keep pets, not livestock. Pets. People capture young wild animals, monkeys, parrots, all sorts of creatures, and carry them home and raise them and dote on them. These animals are, by any economic measure, useless. They will never be eaten. In many of these cultures, eating them would be unthinkable. They do no work, they produce nothing, they are kept purely because someone wanted to keep them. And it goes further than casual keeping. In some Amazonian societies, women have been documented breastfeeding orphaned wild animals, nursing a baby monkey at the breast right alongside their own human infant. Read that again. People with barely enough to feed themselves, giving their own body's milk to a wild animal that will never repay a single calorie of it. This detonates the most common assumption about pets, the lazy idea that pet keeping is a modern, wealthy, indulgent, faintly decadent thing, that it's what people do when they have too much money and not enough purpose. It is not. It appears in societies with no surplus at all, nothing to spare, nothing to waste, which means it isn't a luxury that wealth unlocks. It's something far deeper and far harder to explain away. The impulse to bring a creature into your home and care for it for no reason at all seems to be wired into human beings pretty much wherever you find them. And once you start looking, you find that people haven't just kept animals across history. They've mourned them, publicly, by name, in ways that should feel startlingly familiar. In the ancient city of Ashkelon, On the coast of what is now Israel, archaeologists uncovered something that has puzzled people ever since. A cemetery of more than 1,000 dogs, not a pit, not a mass grave, individual burials, each dog laid carefully on its side in its own space, with no signs of sacrifice or violence. We still argue about exactly why it was made, but whatever the complete explanation turns out to be, someone went to enormous, deliberate trouble to bury a very large number of dogs with something that looks a great deal like respect. Go to ancient Rome and it gets even more intimate. People carved gravestones for their dogs, real funerary monuments, inscribed with the animal's name and the grief of its owner, stones that describe a small dog the household adored, that insist it was never once a nuisance, that mourn the silence it left behind. The wording, read across 2,000 years, sounds almost exactly like what a heartbroken person would post about their pet today. The Egyptians famously mummified their cats by the many thousands, and the historian Herodotus claimed that when a household cat died, the family would shave off their eyebrows in mourning. Whether or not that particular detail is precisely true, the pattern is unmistakable. For as far back as we can see, humans have not treated their animals as objects. They have treated them as members of the family who happened to have fur. So we arrive finally at the question we started with. Why? Why would a species this practical, this shaped by the brutal arithmetic of survival, pour so much into creatures that give so little back? And the honest answer is that there isn't one clean reason. There are several stacked on top of one another. Part of it, undeniably, is mutual benefit. Dogs did eventually earn their keep, spectacularly. They helped us hunt. They guarded our camps. They slept against us for warmth. They woke us the instant something moved in the dark. Cats saved our harvests from vermin. Over time, the partnership paid off in hard practical currency. But, and this is the crucial part, that payoff came after the bond, not before it. Nobody sat up all night beside that dying puppy in Oberkassel running a cost-benefit analysis. The usefulness is real, but it's the justification we found later, not the reason we started. Some of it is almost certainly about what our own minds are built to do. Human beings are, at our core, a species that cares for the helpless. We are wired to respond to the small, the young, the vulnerable, to want to shield the thing that cannot shield itself. It's the machinery that lets us raise children who stay dependent for the better part of 2 decades. And that machinery, it turns out, isn't especially fussy about what sets it off. A whimpering puppy, a big-eyed kitten, a helpless creature of almost any kind can trip the same ancient wiring. The instinct to care didn't evolve for pets. Pets just happen to be exactly the right shape to switch it on. And part of it may be something broader still. A genuine, deep-rooted pull toward other living things. Some scientists argue we carry an innate affinity for life itself, an attraction to the animal and the growing and the green, forged over the millions of years we spent utterly embedded in the natural world. On that view, a life surrounded by animals isn't the strange thing at all. The strange thing is the modern life that isn't. The pet on your floor may be less an indulgence than a quiet correction, a way of pulling one warm living thing back into a world we've otherwise stripped almost bare of them. But underneath all of it, I think, sits the thing that grave in Oberkassel showed us 14,000 years ago. Keeping a pet is the least practical thing we do. And that is precisely the point. It is proof, running unbroken from the Ice Age to your living room floor, that human care was never purely a transaction, that we are capable of spending ourselves on something that will never, ever balance the books. The same instinct that made a Stone Age human sit up through the night with a dying puppy is the same instinct that makes us tend the sick and raise the slow and stay beside the people who can offer us nothing in return. It is not a flaw in our practicality. It might be the single best thing about us. The willingness to love the useless is the same willingness that built everything we are. So look at your dog again, lying on the floor, contributing nothing, costing you time and money, and one day, inevitably, a piece of your heart. It has never earned its keep. It never will. And it never had to. Because 14,000 years ago, on a cold patch of ground in a world without a single thing you'd recognize, somebody knelt beside an animal that could do nothing for them and chose to keep it alive anyway. For no reason, for the only reason, the same non-reason that has you, right now, reaching down to scratch the ears of a creature you would burn the entire practical world to the ground to protect. You were never just keeping a pet. You were keeping a promise your species made a very long time ago. And every single time you feed something that can't feed you back, you're keeping it still.